All right, so now we're on to, I think a lot of people maybe showed up for this. We're going to look at Donnie from Standing for Truth doing a presentation here for us. Let me blow this up. No, not full screen. I like doing it in theater mode. Just makes it easier for me to bounce back and forth, at least while I only have one screen. When I get two screens, I'll do the full screens again. Right now, I'm going to do it like this. I hope that's okay. I popped up to 15 minutes on this video because it's all, just some shilling for their channel and their upcoming stuff, all that. We get it, Donnie. You have a channel. You do panels and debates, just content like this. So he was doing this stream. I just happened to pop in to bug him mostly. I question the things he's saying from the side chat. He doesn't respond to me. It's not anymore. He responded to me as Brain Bug, but doesn't really respond to me as Bumblebee or as HiveScience. So I don't know if it's. I think he does know that I'm the same person though. So whatever it is, Donnie. If you want to engage with me, go right ahead. But we're going to engage with you. Mm-hmm.
Seminar section so far. Like, I don't know if you can see me. There you go. Evolutionist tears. This is what keeps me going strong. This is how I do 12 hours.
Evolutionist tears.
Content in a couple days. Better than any cup of coffee. So, the best evidence for evolution: debunked, dismantled, decimated. Whatever words you want to use to describe it. But the question is going to be, what do we mean by evolution, right? Evidence for evolution, question mark. Well, it depends what you mean by evolution. And proponents, guardians, defenders of evolution, the defenders of evolution.
I do that too. I just don't have the software to do it right now. Purple. I have a whole back catalog. I do a clipped session of CryptoCorner on Friday nights. I do a clipped session, I do the clipped section of CreationWatch on Wednesday nights, and then on Monday I'll do whatever spare topic that we talk about, whatever we HiveScience about. Sometimes that topic doesn't turn out to be anything enough for me to engage with. But yeah, I do that. I'm just not in a place where I can do it right now. But that's good because I'm building up a back catalog, and that way I can get, once I get all this edited out, I'll have weeks and weeks in advance of cut material to release. And now it's easier to cite those two, to cite where I've discussed this topic or that topic, when I have them in little videos and stuff, send somebody out to a 2 or 3 hour stream that I did, and say, yeah, it's somewhere in there. Just in general. All right, back to Donnie. What was he saying?
And that's going to be their villain title. We'll be the guardians of creation. So proponents of evolution are guilty of assuming change over time means large.
It's not a see. That's what I was talking about. Assume. In that last little article, the last topic we just covered, we were talking about tulpas. You just assume things. No, we don't assume things. We interpret things, and we infer things from the data sets that we receive from multiple fields of science. So we get a geological layer with a fossil in it, and we say, hey, how is this rock? Hey, what's this rock from? Hey, there's an ecology trapped inside these rocks with pollen and spores that we can tell what kind of environment that this was. Hey, this bone is from this organism that we found in this layer of rock on this continent, and now it's over here. So we can make all kinds of inferences. It's the same as like a detective investigating a crime scene. You see blood splatter, you see footprints, you see a vent blowing this way or that way. Just different things that can affect the scene and tell us what happened and how these events played out, even if they were millions of years ago and frozen in stone.
Scale evolution is true. Okay, guys, change over time is not disputed. We know that all kinds of things change over time, right? Cars can change over time. Our cell phones change over time. The way we think about certain things changes over time. So if by evolution...
I'm confused here with what he's got on the screen, actually. Can you see my mouse? Can you see my mouse when it's going over the screen? Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I'm confused because he's got domestic dog, coyote, and wolf. That's not an evolutionary line of descent there. These coyotes are... Domestic dogs and wolves are the same species. Coyotes are in the same genus, but they're different species. But he's got this as fairy tale over here. You got a your banana and your pony and flowers and stuff, but there's a wolf and a domestic dog as well. Oh yeah, mosquito and a whale, or dolphin, because orcas are dolphins, but dolphins are whales, so or cetacins. If you want to keep cetacins as a monophyletic category, then dolphins are a type of whale. But we'll get in more into nested cladistics as we go along, I promise. But a wolf and a dog, I think that according to this over here, Donnie agrees with that. So I don't know why they're over here. Maybe because he thinks that Donnie think that we were like, oh yeah, a wolf evolved into a horse and then a domestic dog. I don't know. I hope he doesn't think a wolf evolved into he doesn't think a wolf evolved into a coyote and then a domestic dog.
Evolution. The evolutionist means change over time.
Right.
The biological definition of evolution simply means changes in allele frequencies in populations over time or over generations. Then
no, it also means over geographic and ecological gradient as well. They can be in the same location and retain the same allele frequencies, but when a group moves into another region, another biome, even the same type of biome in another location on a landmass, other pressures even the smallest pressures can cause a different allele frequency to take hold in the population, and you have a new distinct group with a distinct frequency in their alleles, and as those accumulate over time, speciation occurs. These are not things that Donnie understands.
There's nothing to argue over. That is not disputed. Change over time is not disputed. Okay, we as biblical creationists, we expect change. But the question is, what type of change is being observed? Is it the type that's consistent with the biblical model of ancestry? Or is it the type of change that is consistent and necessary for pond scum to people evolution, to take your fish, to fishermen?
So Donnie likes dogs. I like dogs too, Donnie. I enjoy talking about canines. There's a reason, though, I think that Donnie likes to focus on canines. It's because all extant canines have the same body form, right? All the dogs have the same. And again, I'm talking about just within the genus Canis. I don't know where he stands if he believes foxes are a descendant from the same ancestor as dogs and wolves too. That'd be an interesting conversation to have, because foxes have canid traits, but they do have some more what we call basal physiology in comparison to some of the more derived species of canids. And we have foxes that do different behaviors or act different ecologically than wolves. Obviously, behavioral traits are important to designate a species, but two different groups within a species can certainly have different behaviors, especially if they're a social animal, because some of that's cultural. Which makes me think of the whales that brought into fashion wearing a salmon on your head for a couple of months. It's kind of a funny thing. Anyway, I'm ranting again. Let's let Donnie continue to talk.
And basically, the changes we see in terms of allele frequencies, allele frequency changes, it does not equal or equate to evolution, especially the type of evolution.
So you just said biological evolution is changing allele frequencies. And now you said allele frequency change does not count as evolution. So it can't be both. You can't define evolution as a change in allele frequencies and then say a change in allele frequencies isn't evolution. It doesn't work that way. Pick one. If you want to use a different word for it, and then you're going to have to explain what you mean by evolution. And I'm sure what you mean when you say evolution, I wouldn't agree with either. I'm sure across the spectrum of people who accept some level of evolution, I bet Peter wouldn't even agree with your straw man version of evolution. He's a young Earth creationist as well. So, yeah. Anyway, I do like this tree, though.
Evolution that you can see here on the evolutionary tree of life, which it's funny. I've had nearly 100 debates on all sorts of topics, but most debates on evolutionary theory and ancestry. Mm-hmm. And many evolutionists, more so the uninformed ones, they will at first argue that no, they're not related to mushrooms.
Who's arguing that? If you're talking to someone who is making the claim that we have a last common ancestor with all life on Earth in our model. If you're talking to someone who says that that's not true, then you are just picking on someone who's uninformed and basically, talking to someone who doesn't have the necessary knowledge to have the conversations, and then using that as a win, I guess, because they don't know these things. It sounds like you're just you're picking on people who aren't educated.
They're not related to banana plants. They're not related to whales or green algae or bacteria.
You are related to whales and green algae and bacteria and mosquitoes. Plants, banana plants. Yeah, you are. You sure are.
Because it sounds silly, because it is silly. But universal common ancestry would say that life is universally, believe it or not, universally related. While the biblical creationists will hold to what's called separate ancestry, okay, which would argue that bacteria and humans, or bacteria and whales, are not related. But evolutionists would say bacteria and whales are related to common ancestry. So yes, a lot of evolutionists, they waste time saying, no, we don't believe that. We don't believe banana plant and whales are related. That's a strong man. And then you show them their universal phylogenetics.
Ooh, I like this one too, but it's so blurry I can't see it. I think I have this one somewhere on my big computer though. Again, if you're talking to someone who says that last common ancestry or that Luca isn't real, then you're talking to someone who doesn't know enough about the conversation to be having the conversation. So you're just bullying them at that point. Talk to someone who knows what they're talking about, Donnie. Talk to me.
Tree of life, and eventually it's like a light bulb going off, and they realize, yes, I do believe that I am related to a banana plant. Okay, I do believe, the evolutionists, that is not me, that whales and pine trees are related. And that's basically what universal common ancestry would teach. Okay, as you can see here, you've got that single-celled like ancestor at the bottom of the tree, where you have the origin of life, abiogenesis. But from these lifeless chemicals, you basically get your first single-celled like ancestor, which evolves into a multi-celled ancestor, which evolves into a fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal, monkey, man. Okay, up the tree of life. That's why you see man at the top, with rhinos, elephants over here, jellyfish, octopus. So everything's related according to the universal common ancestry model.
Right.
So for large-scale evolution to be true, you basically need, in terms of genomic changes that are observed, you need those changes to be vertical. But unfortunately, what we see in the genome equates to horizontal changes. What I mean by that is modifications of pre-existing systems and genetic variation is not evidence that single-cell-like ancestors evolved into whales and humans over long.
What do you mean vertical? I don't understand what you mean by that. You're talking about novel changes, but they have to still use the alphabet. That's like saying that you can't create new words. You can't create a new sentence if you don't create new letters. That's not how it works. It's still a new word. It's still a new species if you rearrange the letters, the alleles, to spell something else. It is. He's going to use this flying analogy here in a second, but it's more like that than anything than flying for sure. And organisms do evolve slowly over time, the ability to fly, and we can talk about that. Absolutely, it's happened 5 or 6 times. So if you want to engage about that, Donnie, we can definitely talk about the evolution of flight over various organisms throughout time. That'll fit your Superman analogy. But yeah, saying you can't make new sentences by rearranging the letters that exist, by rearranging pre-existing letters. And yeah, every now and then a new letter does pop up in language, or languages evolve and change, and old letters get removed from the genome, and new letters come into play. But that's rare. And when you get a new letter, all of a sudden you have all these new things you can do with that new letter, that new arrangement that helps your descendants to prosper in a different environment. Sometimes that new letter will everything up, and you won't be able to function. You won't be able to reproduce. You're dead. You're done. You're out of the bloodline. But when that letter is successful, when that change in the arrangements of these letters, when these little words are switched around just a little bit, and it works, and the organism's able to thrive in its environment, it passes that on. It's very simple, Donnie. You're overcomplicated. It's not flying. It's not Superman flying.
That's not what we see, and that's not consistent with data. Okay, the types of alterations needed to explain large-scale evolution need to be vertical changes that can create true novelties, expand genetic information, increase,
You can expand that by rearranging existing information that is housed in the genomes. You can rearrange that and create new novel changes that I guess would be considered vertical by whatever you're saying with vertical and horizontal. But you would say it's horizontal because it's using the same information that the predecessor has. Again, there are novel changes that do create new letters or remove them from the genome, but whether or not they take hold in the population is going to be subjective to the pressures that they're under.
Specific complexity. Again, the observed changes are consistent with the pre-existing capacity for change. And that's what we're going to get into in a little bit, the design diversity model. As you can see here, evolutionists imagine that time can solve all of their problems, right? Over time, a single-celled-like ancestor can evolve into a whale. But here's the thing. If I told you that Superman could fly quickly through the air, you'd say that's silly. That's myth. That doesn't fit reality. But if I told you Superman could fly slowly through the air, you'd say that's more believable. The evolutionists would say that, basically, because time is the hero of the evolutionists. But more time.
That's not a comparable expression. He can fly slowly through the air. It's not about that if that happens slowly. It's about rate of reproduction. Organisms have a set rate of reproduction, a set rate at which they reach maturity and perform the whatever reproductive process that they go under, whether it's sexual, whether it's asexual, whatever, whether there's pollination involved, all these things that come into play. There's going to be a generational time frame for how quickly that organism reproduces, and thus how quickly these allele changes take hold in the population. And some allele changes may take hold in one population but not in another, or die out in one population because it's not a viable arrangement for the environmental pressures that they're under, or they may integrate themselves with another population with a different feature and create a whole new genetic layout, a whole new set of allele frequencies. A lot of things can come into play. This is nothing like flying slowly through the air. What are you talking about, Donnie?
Actually equals more deleterious mutation accumulation, okay? Because the mechanisms for evolutionary transformation, to take a single-celled-like ancestor, move it into a whale over lots of time, mutations, selection, epigenetics, to add the necessary genetic material for natural selection to act upon, that's mutation. Mutations to the evolutionary model is the source for all genetic variation. But the problem is, most of these mutations turn out to be deleterious, damaging, disease-causing, and also, rather than being absolutely neutral, they are effectively neutral or nearly neutral. That means natural selection, being a limited force, being a stability-inducing force, it keeps a species as strong as it can be, but it's not adding anything.
It doesn't keep a species as strong as it can be. I wouldn't describe it that way anyway, because it's not more like, oh, it's selecting for the positive traits that are the best. It's just getting rid of the bad ones. That's it. Other things that are neutral, or even stuff that are deleterious but not detrimental or not fatal, can still take hold in the population for generations and generations. Like albinism's a good example there. You can still procreate if you're albino, but it's not optimal for your species to be albino, especially if you depend on things like camouflage in the wild in order to collect food or hide from predators or find a mate. It's not optimal, but organisms can survive with those genes. They can survive with that defect. So yeah, just to it's not just as cut and dry. You're saying, oh, deleterious is gone, pass on the good stuff. And no, they do take hold and get passed onto the next generation. Things that are not beneficial to you. We have tons of things in our biology right now that are not beneficial to us. You have cells in your body that at some point in time in your life, more likely than not, that are going to turn against you, that are going to mutate and become cancerous and going to kill you. The longer you live, the more likely that is to happen. But by the time you're old and gray, you have already procreated and had your children if you intended to. So it doesn't matter. That does not affect what you pass on to those children, because those effects come into play long after your breeding age.
new, and selection can't see most mutations. Selection can't see the effectively neutral mutations that are building up over time, leading systems and organisms into genetic sickness. Mutations degrade genetic functionality and information content. Since selection can't see these mutations,
and there's no one's disagreeing that the mutation of genetic defects can't be deleterious and negative to the population. But when they get to a point, it doesn't matter if one mutation caused you to not be able to create a sustainable bloodline in your population, or if multiple organisms or multiple mutations accumulated to a point where you are no longer able to contribute genetically to your population. It doesn't matter whether it's one or an abundance of these mutations. It's not going to make a difference. At that point, you are no longer a viable member of the population, and only the viable members of the population move forward. So the rate of accumulation doesn't really matter whether it's just one deleterious mutation or multiple that cause the organism to die off or to not contribute to the population. The ones that are still contributing to the population have functional genetics. They're not going to be subject to that accumulation. That's why they're still part of the population. I don't understand this argument at all.
Mutations are subject to genetic drift. They spread through populations over time. This means that time, although the evolutionist wants time to be the hero of the plot, is actually the enemy. Because the more time you get, the more extinction and degeneration you get.
Yeah, but you also get viable populations as well. Survival of the fittest, right? We get rid of the ones that can't hang. It's the way that it works. So whether it's one mutation or a suite of mutations that cause an organism to not be able to contribute, it's gone. It doesn't matter anymore.
So no, Superman flying quickly through the air or slowly through the air is still a fairy tale. A single cell-like ancestor evolving into a whale quickly, that's fairy tale. A single cell-like ancestor evolving into a whale slowly, it's still a fairy tale. It's pseudoscience. And you can have trillions of years, and all you're going to get is more extinction, more disease, more degeneration. That is basic. That's what we know about mutations. If you can't show me how it happened, universal common ancestry, common descent, don't tell me that it did happen. Because you don't have a mechanism. Because your proposed mechanisms, evolutionists, degrade functionality. Your so-called best beneficial mutations turn out to be reductive, turn out to be functionally compromising organisms. All right. If I told you Mary Poppins could fly quickly through the air with her umbrella, you'd admit that that's a fair.
That's just a hollow claim, though, that all the mutations are. Sorry, I already went over it again.
Mary Poppins could fly slowly through the air with an umbrella. You'd say, no, that's not a fairy tale. Evolution is about the slow accumulation of mutations leading to genetic variation that selection can act upon. That's what's going to take your single-celled-like ancestor into a whale. No. Again, slowly.
Did he need the Superman and the Mary Poppins on this slide? Wouldn't one or the other have been sufficient? It's the same, because it's the same argument, just with different fictional characters.
It's a fairy tale. It doesn't happen. Grandpa, I'm here to tell you that no, contrary to what the pseudoscientific...
Right. Modern primates, modern monkeys, so to speak, are not our ancestors. We share a common ancestor with them. That's not your grandpa.
The evolutionists want to say, this is not your grandpa, and that's what this presentation is going to prove. Evolutionists hope, dream, and imagine that whales and pine trees are related. So again, whether you have trillions of years or thousands of years, evolution is not going to happen. Okay, so I want to go through a couple.
All right, here we get to that. This was the thumbnail when we start talking about the horses. It's not just horses. I just thought the ponies part was funny.
Slides here, just showing the amazing variety in God's.
This is another situation like I was talking about with the dogs, though. So Donnie can wrap his head around this because morphologically, there's not a lot of variety within modern horses. There's only one genus, Equus. So, or sorry, there's only one. Is it one genus or one family? Anyway, correct me if I'm wrong there. But they have a similar morphology. Most of them can interbreed together because they're so whittled down to just these few clades. The other, where are the? So let's talk about horses. Horses evolved in North America, whereas zebras are from Africa. They have been separated by millions of years. They are from completely different corners of the world, yet they can still procreate together if we let them. Because horses, when the other ungulates kind of push their way onto the scene, I'm talking like cattle and caprines and things like that, deer, cervids, these what they call them, even-toed ungulates, kind of push the odd-toed ungulates, our horses, our rhinos, our tapirs, into niche habitats, with a few exceptions. Zebras do really well, but the efficiency of the digestive process, reproductive process, and everything of equids is less efficient in the long run than what, like cattle, their primary competition in their biome. But they still do all right. They still manage to eke out a living. But there's not a lot of diversity among them anymore. There used to be a lot more. There used to be other odd-toed ungulate clades and other equid or horse-like clades that were very different. Some with 3 toes and things like that in the recent past. But yeah, they have lost a lot of their ground to cattle because they kind of put up a better grazing face than the horses do with their multiple stomachs and chewing and whatnot.
Design world, okay? Because in the biblical model, remember, we're looking at the changes. The changes that we see, are they consistent with the evolutionary model, or are they consistent with the evolutionary model or the biblical model? So looking at the chat, looks like everything's good. Okay, appreciate it. So in the biblical creation model, we have God front-loading creatures with what? Well, with the ability to change and adapt to new environments. Guys, if God did not front-load creatures with the ability to vary and to adapt to their environment, species would have gone extinct by now. Ever-changing environments require what? Well,
so these are all descent from one kind, and this is why Donnie likes dogs and zebras. And we're going to get into a different clade here when it comes to why he's picking these. Again, similar morphology. You can look at the horse. You can look at everything from a Clydesdale to a pony, from a Chihuahua to a Saint Bernard, and say, yes, I can see how within a few generations that these organisms evolved from a common ancestor. Not a few generations, but in a few thousand years, I can see how this could be selectively bred for these traits to become dominant in the population. And it doesn't seem, as far-fetched as what we get into when we start looking at some other clades, because not all clades contain or retain the same morphological features that we see in the homologous groupings of equids or canids, who have, through various forms of selective breeding for domestic stock and isolation and just bottlenecking of organismal groups, retained similar genetic material to one another. We'll get
ever-changing genomes. Adaptation, which is what we see with these changes. But the evolution wants to erroneously equate adaptation with the evolution of higher life forms, the evolution of novel body plans.
Adapting to one's ecological position is the first step to evolution. Once an organism group moves into a new environment with different pressures, the ones who are not adapted to handle those pressures, whether it's solar radiation, that again we're talking about the albinos, for instance. Say there's a white morph of an organism that moves into an area, and they all develop skin cancer very young. Yes, some of them will pass on their genes, some of them will not, because the skin cancer hits them too young. The ones with darker complexions will have more success because they don't get cancer as often or as young, and they will pass on their genes. The genes for darker skin complexion comes into play to protect them from solar radiation. And suddenly you have a group that is adapted to a different environment and has a unique set of alleles that aids them in surviving in that environment. Now, your claim is that these types of changes have limitations, or that they can't accumulate towards being a new species, and I don't understand why or what you think is standing in the way from. Again, that's just one pressure, the solar radiation. There may be other things too. There may be humidity levels that cause heat strokes and ones that have too much fur. There may be it may be cold and they need more fur in this population, and that population they don't. And there's more solar radiation down towards the equator than up towards the poles. There may be pressures to create an enzyme in your saliva to help break your food down for better digestion. There are in opening you up to a new food source. There are so many factors that come into play environmentally, and you're saying your problem is that yes, you can say that, oh, this one thing can happen. They can change their colors, or they can change their size, or they can develop more robust antlers, things like that. That you're like saying, oh, they can't accumulate all these changes over time, over millions of years, to create new species. But you want to say that these individual groupings here that you're showing went through all these changes within a few generations, which is why you stick with things like canids and equids.
No, I'm sorry. We have something called the Cambrian explosion. We have all of these phyla suddenly appearing. Okay, this explosion of new body plans and novel organisms.
No, we don't. That's not what the Cambrian explosion is. And it wasn't an explosion. It happened over 50 million years. Not, you're saying that the changes that you are equating to have happened with your model to these groups that we're seeing on the screen right now is supposed to have happened in a few hundred years, but you're mocking the fact that the Cambrian explosion, a period of 50 million years, could have produced a influx of new organisms due to what they call a niche vacuum within the environment once the microbial mat started breaking down there in the Cambrian.
The evolutionary model for a second, the space of time we have available for the evolution of this massive amount of variation and complexity is tiny. To take a land mammal into a whale over time, according to the evolutionary model, took about 10 million years, while getting jellyfish and coral and trilobites and all of this phyla, all of these massively different organisms, phylum level differences occurred in a moment.
It wasn't a moment. It wasn't. The explosion is on a geological time period. So I think what I hear mostly is 23 or something like that, or 20 to 50 million years, leading more towards the 50 million side of things for the Cambrian explosion. You just admitted that the changes from a land organism to a aquatic organisms, as with the whales, took place in less than 10 million years, but you're having a hard time wrapping your head around how simple organisms can develop hard bodies within 50 million years. This argument is not the win you think it is.
Explosion. And it's not just the Cambrian explosion. We see explosions all throughout fossil records. The fossil record is not...
It is called niche vacuums, which are the result of extinction events, not necessarily global extinction events, but those are the most famous niche vacuums, like the Great Dying, the PK, the PK. Why am I the tertiary, the PKT? Yeah, the one that killed dinosaurs. Those are the two big ones that most people think about. Those created niche vacuums where new groups of organisms could move into roles that were formerly held by previous organisms that died in the extinction event. When there's a major extinction event like that, it kills out the specialists, the ones who have evolved to live in this environment and consume this type of nourishment exclusively. They do not survive well in extinction events. Generalists do. Generalists like our ancestors, which were very similar to tree shrews, like the ancestors, the things that survived of the equids, their early ancestors, little almost rodent-like organisms that filled a similar niche to that. But all of a sudden, the large grazer niche opened up, and these guys were able to nourish themselves off plant material, and no competition led to larger body size and more efficient walking to cover more ground and graze further. So suddenly we have horses. That's why when after an extinction event, we have such rapid evolutionary changes, but the rapid evolution that takes place after these extinctions is nowhere near as fast as the evolution that you're going to claim takes place when animals climb off the ark.
Not evidence for evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Fossil record, what we see is stasis, sudden appearance, the explosion of novel body plans. Okay, consistent with creation. And again, the best way to determine ancestry, anyways, is through genetics. It's genes, traits, and genetics that are inherited from it. Not a rock, not geography, not a bone. And that is why looking at a bone without the genetics, without breed. That's
like saying a murder scene or a murder is not about the murder scene, just about the body. No, you need to examine the murder scene too, buddy.
It's going to be incredibly difficult to determine what is the result of homology or what is the result of convergent evolution.
It is difficult to determine what is homology and what is divergent evolution. We've had some surprises when we've mapped genomes. That's true. That's moving forward.
Because today we understand that there oftentimes exists more variation within the same species than across species. If every single dog breed today, what is there, about 400 of them, were to drown in a flood, and thousands of years later, the bones of these dogs, from your Great Dane to your Husky to your Chihuahua, were dug up, you get all kinds of erroneous conclusions. This evolved into this. This is.
Well, they'd all be in the same layer, so they wouldn't say that each species was the ancestor of the previous one, but I think that they could map out the domestication process and the foreshortening of, I think I had a video actually I pulled up of that. I have all these tabs open to go over stuff that he says, but I didn't even really need it. Is this it? It was showing literal in the changes of a dog's physiology over generations of domestication process. The foreshortening of the nose, you get shorter muzzles and things like this. This reminds me of my belly beast. I sure miss her. She's so cute. Anyway, so yeah, we can visually see the changes that take place in the domestication process, and those would be, at least to some extent, retained in the fossil record. There may be holes like what we have in the fossil record now, where certain generations or certain, I guess in this case, dogs, certain stages of the breeding process didn't make it into the fossil record. But we could probably track that. I don't know that they would say they're different species because we understand that domestication does lead to rapid morphological changes. So I don't know that would be the case, that they'd say, hey, these are two different species because they found a Shih Tzu skull and a Mastiff skull or something like that. They would say, hey, look how good this the human species was at creating new morphologies for these organisms for different purposes. Or maybe say, hey, look how impressively plastic the dog's genome is, that the humans were able to domesticate it in all these different directions to serve these different purposes.
Related to this, even though they all belong to the domestic dog category. And that's what we see in the fossil record, is they've accidentally taken different bones. I believe there was a variation of Tyrannosaurus Rex. And it was actually the same species, the same creature, but in different stages of its life. Okay, adulthood, a younger dinosaur. They erroneously concluded that these are multiple species, but then they determined.
Yeah. So what he's talking about here is what we have called Nanotyrannus. It actually made an appearance in a documentary in the 2000s. Now, they now believe that Nanotyrannus is a juvenile form of Tyrannosaurus Rex that fills a completely different ecological niche and thus has different morphology to help it as a smaller game hunter, whereas when they reach maturity, they reach full T-Rex size, they have a completely different ecological niche which they fill. It keeps them at a competition with their with members of their own species, why they grow, but it does lead to them having some physiological characteristics that are surprising because they are built more like pursuit predators. They are more similar to the smaller species like Adaplosaurus, like the smaller pursuit Tyrannosaurus. Because you look at something big like Tyrannosaurus Rex, we don't see it as necessarily something that would be a fast-moving pursuit predator. More maybe holding like a niche, like a bear or a big cat, where it's doing ambushes on its prey. But that's why they had this distinction between the two, and it's a fascinating discovery that it was the same species. I think that's a good thing in science. I don't think that means, oh, let's throw everything we know about speciation out, because organisms at various stages in their development fill different ecological niches and have physiological characteristics to aid them in surviving in those niches.
Because remember, fossil records, low quality, low confidence science. They ended up realizing, oops, this is the same species. This is the same creature, just at different stages of its life. But they said it's different species. This is how
saying that fossil records is low quality, would you consider like fingerprint records as low quality? Because that's essentially what it is. It's like, hey, we have the historical fingerprints of these organisms and how they developed throughout the history of life on this earth. Is that not a good quality of evidence where they're leaving like trace remains of their existence and how they lived, where they lived, what they ate, what ate them, how they interacted with other organisms, how their social hierarchy was, what their brain function levels were? We can tell whether they were social, whether they, what spectrums of light they could see, and just from their bones. Hell, we can tell what color some things were if we have any skin or fur impressions on the fossils alone. Low quality, my ass.
Weak the fossil record is, okay? And they have no good answer for the Cambrian explosion. A phylum level event like we see in the Cambrian explosion would require an astronomical number of evolutionary experiments and misfits. Okay, and yet we have no evidence for these novel body plans and creatures popping up in the Cambrian explosion. Again, the fossil record shows a stasis and sudden appearance.
Hey, PZ, glad you showed up for me to torture you. Sorry, I only have one screen, so I haven't been popping out to the side chat as much as possible, but it's good to see you, Mr. PZ Myers. Body plans don't rescue the Bible. They're all related, and the Bible says nothing about body plans anyway, right? Genes, he thinks genes save his bullshit. Nothing can save Donnie's bullshit, PZ. Darwin himself pointed out hidden varieties would be seen as multiple species if we were only to use the skeletons. So yeah, and I think that genetics and then genetic studies would say, hey, no, these are all the same species. Right. Anyway, moving on.
And not large scale evolution. It is going to be in the world of genetics that we can best answer this question of ancestry. And so with the fossil record out of the way,
I don't disagree, but I think the fossil record is a level of evidence that supports that, and we can discern a lot about an organism and the way it interacted with its environment based on the fossil record that we're not going to get from its genetics.
That's what I mean we want to focus on. Very true. Doki. Okay, so right here, you see a great variety. Okay, you see a great variety of, for example, equids. Because again, in the biblical creation model,
I don't see a great variety in equids. I don't know what variety you're seeing. I see maybe some differences in size, overall size, and coat patterns.
God creating the original created archetypes with huge levels of what's called heterozygosity, a state of DNA diversity. This way, species can adapt to their environment. Because again, if they did not have pre-existing genetic diversity, the ability to change and vary.
What caused that to stop, though? Why are we not seeing, like when zebras move into a new environment, them not evolving to have a donkey coat pattern because it's efficient for that? Why are they not developing spots when they're in the forest? There are things that we would expect to see if the rapid type of heterozygosity that you claim to exist was an effect on the organisms that climbed off the Bible and these set little baramin, or I say baramin, I don't know if that's the term you use, Donnie, but these kinds groups that or preloaded with all this variation, but yet we do not see them expressing this variation or this ability to change and adapt at this rapid level that you're claiming happens. That's not recognized anywhere that we're seeing that.
They go extinct rapidly. And so adaptation is actually evidence of God's brilliance and ability to think ahead. If you want evidence for God, look for evidence of forward thinking. And look for evidence of forward thinking in the genome.
Oh, bovids.
Especially with the so-called junk DNA areas of our genome.
So are all bovids a kind? Or are you saying based on this image, are you saying that buffalo are their own kind, separate from other bovids? Bison and boss, or bison and boss in the same... Are they the same kind? What about other members of the cattle group? When we talk about antelope, are antelope and cattle the same kind? Because there are bovids that can interbreed with antelope. So are they the same kind then? So now we got antelope and bovids and cows and buffalo, all the same kind, all the same organism, going through very, very, very different developments in just a few short 1,000 years from, again, the smallest antelopes are the size of house cats, whereas the biggest buffaloes are tons in weight, all within a few thousand years. This is your evolutionary model. All this happened in 1,000 years, but they stopped now. They stopped changing and adapting to their environment. Some miraculous force came along as soon as we started recording the different species that we see on the planet and stopped them from doing all these rapid changing that they had been doing for thousands of years, with new species emerging from each generation with completely different physiological features, adapted for completely different environmental biomes, all taking place within a few thousand years around the globe. When we're talking about our ungulates here, when we're talking about our cattle here, when we're talking about antelopes, and then you get into things that are feeling the same niche and have genetic similarity, like cervids to bovids or caprines, goats and sheep. There's a lot of unanswered questions that you're raising here, Donnie.
We understand that what used to be some of their best arguments, like pseudogenes, which they used to say, well, we've got these pseudogenes, these shared genetic mistakes between humans and chimpanzees, and therefore we must have inherited them from a common ancestor roughly 6 to 10 million years ago. And so those shared pseudogenes are evidence of that relationship because they've been passed down. But it turns out that pseudogenes represent functional DNA units. Okay, functional DNA elements necessary to sustain healthy life processes in the cell. We see the same thing with endogenous retroviruses or loose sequences, all types of non-coding RNA genes. This all screams of forward thinking because a lot of these DNA elements are only called upon and manifested under certain situations, certain environmental conditions. Okay, why that's important is it's very simple.
Yes, Mr. Lizard brings up a good point. I wonder if Donnie would consider a dodo as being in the pigeon kind, and that's why he focuses on things like dogs and horses, because the wild ancestors and wild cousins of equus, the domestic horses, or domestic dogs, canines, have a similar physiological appearance. But when we get to the things that have a lot of variety, like we're in cattle right now, where there's a lot of physiological variety based on the ecology of the organism, then that's where his argument falls apart, because now we're going to need to divide cattle up into different groups. But unless he wants to make the claim that these little swamp dwelling antelope are that are tiny are descended from the same kind as the giant water buffaloes that are several tons in weight. Yeah. Bovine kind. Yeah, so we have bovine kind. Where were we? Sorry. Can two different kinds reproduce with each other? That's the question, right? So I don't think they can. So now we gotta, because bovids can reproduce with other groups. So would antelopes be under bovid kind? Is that the claim? All right. Sorry, I keep pausing, but you're raising some great questions, Mr. Lizard. Thank you. PZ, of course, Ring.
Similar to, let's say, the spare tire in the back of your car, right? At first glance, the evolutionists would say, well, why do you got an extra tire? You've already got your 4 tires, they're working, your car's working fine, that's redundant, it's junk, evolutionary leftover. But no, if you enter an environment where you get a flat tire, then guess what? Thank God you have that spare tire that was put there by human engineers.
No, we understand that. That's why we're jealous of the axolotl, because they can regrow their limbs and we can't. So we understand the benefits of having a spare tire.
Due to forward thinking. And that's what we have in the genomes of living organisms, is evidence for forward thinking that points us back to the forward.
That's a good point, because why did God give the axolotl this forward thinking that, hey, if they lose their limbs, we'll let them regrow it, but didn't give it to any of the other tetrapods?
Sure. Okay. All of this change we see, design diversity, it's based on pre-programmed genetic algorithms. So yes, change is true. Here we go. A variety of cats.
Cats. This is the place where things kind of fall apart for you, Donnie. cats form a rudimentary ring species because you'll see in the top right, we have a cat that has many common names. It's a puma concolor, the cougar, the puma, the panther, mountain lion, depending on what you want to call it. Now, it is considered the largest of the small cats. Cats are divided into two groups. You got your felines and pantherines. The felines being the small cats, the pantherines being the big cats. Big cats include tigers, leopards, lions, jaguars, and snow leopards. There's also Neophilus, but we're not going to get into Neophilus. It's kind of its own thing. That's the clouded leopards. They are a kind of outgroup from the big cats. We'll leave that alone where it is. Then you got your small cats, which is everything from your house cat, your bobcats, fishing cats, wild cats, your Jeffrey's cats, which is what we're seeing here on the left in the center, a caracal, which is below that, a serval, which is in the middle on the bottom there. And then obviously you have this other outgroup, the cheetahs, which are on the right in the middle. Now, the puma is closest in relation genetically to the jaguarundi, which is very much in line with what we expect with a small cat. As a matter of fact, they're in the same genus. It's what is it? Is it Puma anga or something like that? Anyway, the jaguarundi is a smaller cousin of the cougar. Now the cougar can reproduce offspring with a big cat, with leopards. They've bred cougars and leopards together, created babies. They were dwarfs called pumapards. They were very small compared to either of their parents, and they were not healthy. And I believe that one did reach adulthood. I don't know how long it lived, but they were not a viable. If they had produced like what you do when you breed a lion and a tiger, something big, then they probably would have went with it and said, "Oh, this is impressive." But since they were dwarfs and small, it was not really impressive, and the people that breed hybrids weren't really interested in pursuing that. Now, the cheetah, as far as the old world goes, is the closest relative to the puma. But for some reason, cheetahs and leopards cannot reproduce, and cheetahs and pumas cannot reproduce together because the cheetah has been specialized and bottlenecked so much that its genetics are so unique that it can no longer procreate with its closest living ancestors. Yet the puma is definitely Felidae, and pending the size restraints, because it's so much bigger than all other species of felids, it could produce viable hybrid offsprings with a variety of species of felines. So it kind of bridges that gap between these two groups, which are completely different subfamilies. But all of this variety and change is supposed to have happened within a few thousand years, according to Donnie's model. One pair of cats got off the ark, got busy making tigers and lions and servals and bobcats and cougars, which span this whole weird genetic gap and fill an ecological niche that the leopard would fill in the old world because it was empty and needed a ambush predator to fill it. And all this happened in just a few thousand years.
Dogs, a variety of, it's funny because the evolution want to point to a variety of equids or horses, variety of cat, variety of roses, apples, strawberries, and conclude because of the incredible variation that we see that arose simply because of the pre-existing capacity to vary. That means in their mind, right, Darwin saw a variety of finches, and he concluded that finches and banana plants are related to one ancestry. No, Darwin. That proves that we have a variety of finches. Finches can change. Cats.
Yeah, but I've heard that too, Mr. Wizard, that feliform, that some argue that feliform was a kind, not even just the cats, but feliform as a whole, which would mean that hyenas and cats and civets and mongoose all emerged from the ark from one feliform ancestor and diversified into the variety of cats, hyenas, and civets and mongooses and all these other groupings that we have, especially in relation to Africa and the sub-Indian continent, where they fill all these ecological niche that are in most of the rest of the world filled by caniforms.
This can change. Dogs can change. It doesn't demonstrate that dogs, cats, finches, and strawberries are related through common ancestry. You know, that's not science. That's not.
Oh, but dogs and cats do have a common ancestry that we can observe, or that you can observe genetically and within the fossil record and within dental formula, because I'm sure that you agree that dental formulation is diagnostic for grouping animals together, right? Or do you disagree with that? Oh, they have the same teeth because they have the same creator, but you have the same teeth as your mom because you have the same creator, as your dad because you have the same creator. I think that we can say that certain traits are definitely inherited from genetic ancestry, and in that case, we can look at the features and characteristics of caniforms and feliforms and draw the conclusion that they shared a common ancestor, and look back through the fossil records. So we look at these genetic traits that say, hey, it looks like these guys had a common ancestor that's diverged at this point from the genes alone. And then we can go to the fossil record and corroborate that, hey, look, as we go back in time through the geological column that you don't think exists, Donnie, we can see where feliforms and caniforms going back and back become more and more similar in their characteristics till we get to a creature we call them myacids, which have characteristics which could go either way. So yeah, the fossil record corroborates the genetic information that we have to show that feliforms and caniforms have a common ancestor, and form together with them form the extant group of carnivora. Now, so we can say, so maybe carnivora, maybe there was a carnivoran that got off the ark first. Maybe it was originally a carnivoran, because now we have everything from seals to bobcats to otters to grizzly bears to tigers, wolves and hyenas, civets, weasels, all these organisms descending in just a few thousand years from a common carnivore ancestor that got off the ark. But then we look at, the thing is you look at carnivora, and we start to get into a bit of a murky area with them, because there's other, up until fairly recently, there were other groups of carnivorous cousins to the carnivorans that also filled this large predator niche, the large mammalian predator niche, even in these environments for millions of years. The creodonts are what comes to mind, that jumps out to me specifically, but we also had predatory ungulates at the time, which were related to sheep, and or to more closely related to suiforms, I believe, pigs and hippos and things like that, that were competing in this platform too, with qualities and characteristics and genetic markers that indicate a common ancestor with carnivora. And so now we got this grouping of they call Boreotheria, which could be maybe the animal that came off the ark. Maybe it was a Boreotheria that created all these, because of these genetic markers that we see, the same type of information that we see to say a bobcat and a tiger are related. We can say a bear and a pig are related, for instance. So now we have Larazothere. So maybe it was a Larazothere. At this point, are we seeing where we're going with this? Because I think I made my point.
Possible, since the mechanism of change that the evolution to actually degrade genetic functionality. You're not going to get the expansion.
What net mechanisms degrade genetic functionality, though? Because the only thing that survives are the viable offspring with viable genetics.
Of genetic information through degrading mutations that result in a single point mutation can kill an organism. But unfortunately for the evolution,
it can, depending on what point. That's why it's a single point mutation. At what point it is going to come into be a factor on what its effect it has on the viability of the organism.
Most mutations are deleterious. They are effectively neutral selection, can't see them. And so they build up over time. So yes, change is true. Adaptation is true. There's no problem with organisms changing. And claiming that evolution is simply change over time is no help to the evolutionist that wants to argue change over time means whales and strawberries are related to common ancestry. Again, the ability to adapt is exactly why we have so many variations in different kinds of creatures. Again, each creature stays its own kind.
And what kind is that, though? Because we just talked about how there are characteristics between feliforms and caniforms that we could put them under the same kind. Why are you putting them under different kinds? What is it about the cats that say, hey, this is a line here, and caniforms are on one side and cats are on the other, or feliforms are on the other? What's that line? What is the line between the cats and the hyenas even? Where are you making this distinction, genetically speaking, to say, hey, this is a kind and that is a kind, because they share genetic features. And when we in corroboration with the fossil record to show that that these animals became more and more similar as we go back in time.
Archetype, right? You have, let's say, two heterozygous cats on board the ark who are front-loaded with genetic diversity and pre-existing DNA differences. From those pre-existing DNA differences, you get, through environmental triggers and stressors, you get all your different cat variations, from your house cat to your tiger to your lion and everything else, your jaguar.
In just a few thousand years, right? And you're talking things going from, and let's be clear about this. A tiger is not just a blown up house cat with stripes. They have physiological features that are distinct to them. Tigers are large predators of mostly ungulates. So they have powerful shoulder muscles, and they have round pupils, and they have instincts and behavioral drivers to crouch low to the ground and to stir up their prey, a group of prey, and target a weak individual. Small cats, for instance, do not have those robust, massive shoulders, because the organisms that they eat are generally smaller than them: songbirds, lizards, and rodents, stuff that are small. So they have more specialized adaptations to catching their prey with their paws, to juggling a fast-moving prey. Their pupils are slitted to aid with keeping a vertical track of an organism as it moves back and forth. It's in pinning down their binocular vision to attack something small and very precise. So there's physiological features that these organisms have that are very distinct, that would take generations to evolve. So the claim that they're front-loaded with the organism was front-loaded with both of these ecological types, and that's just two. Cats are have more variety among them. There's ones that fish. There's ones that are not strictly nocturnal. There's ones that have one specific organism that they eat, and that's and nothing else, like what we see with the Canadian lynx and the snowshoe hare. All of these behavioral and physiological characteristics all coming into the emerging from the organism within a few thousand years is quite ridiculous.
All based on the pre-existing ability to adapt and change in the first place. I'm going to keep going with slides here, but I'm thinking if I go full screen, it might be easier to see the details of the pictures. Let me know in the chat if that helps a little bit better. So again, a variety of all types of creatures.
Oh, here we go. Something to read. Heterozygous ancestors. Conversely, the fact that so many nuclear DNA differences were present from the start has tremendous implications for the plausibility of speciation on the young Earth timescale. With millions of DNA differences, massive amounts of DNA variety encoded into each kind from the start of their existence, the potential for speciation is mind-boggling. But somehow it doesn't happen now. That doesn't happen anymore. It only happened long ago and far away. They think that this mind-boggling speciation that's supposed to happen in the biblical model is where everything evolves into all these different directions in a few thousand years and then just stops and everything stays where it is. Then is a better argument. I'm not sure how that works. Combined with the fact that species can recover enormous population size in a very short amount of time, depending on their generational cycles, I guess. In addition to the fact that the vast majority of DNA sequences within a creature's appear to be functional, these results demonstrate that millions of species in a few thousand years is not only plausible, it's also probable. But then it just stops. They just quit speciating.
Change that we see that leads to this type of variation is due to the pre-existing capacity for this. So that's not going to help take your fish to fishermen. So yes, the archetypes, they varied since the flood, but they have not experienced any real forward evolution. As a matter of fact, this change has limits. And this is what I want to get into next. The evolutionists are constantly asking the question, well, what... just looking at the chat. All right, so it looks good. We'll keep it this way. Thank you, Cheryl. Appreciate that. So we'll keep it this way, especially if some of the pictures are small. Okay, so yeah, we're just constantly asking, what is the limit to the change then, right? If you're never going to get brand new kinds from previous kinds, then where's the limit? You must draw a line. Well, based on the created heterozygosity model, we're going to have what's called shifts in heterozygosity to homozygosity. So if you think about at creation, you have the most heterozygous ancestors. Okay, and from these heterozygous ancestors, which again just means a state of DNA diversity, millions of DNA differences in chromosome pairs. Okay, and new visible traits, new chromosomal combinations can arise based on this pre-existing genetic diversity. This makes sense because when God said to be fruitful and multiply, did He want this to be carried out through cloning? Of course not. Of course not. So if Adam and Eve, when the created kinds were created genetically homozygous, that's what they would basically produce, is clones. So God said to be fruitful and multiply, and so it only makes sense that God would have front-loaded Adam and Eve and the created kinds with pre-existing functional heterozygosity. But this change, based on the starting point of design diversity, it is going to have limits. All right, creatures adapt and vary based on the available allelic variability, but species hit walls over time. And this is because you can only have so many shifts in heterozygosity, again, a greater level of diversity, to homozygosity, less genetic diversity and allelic variability. Think of a wolf to a dog. I think generally most creationists would admit or agree that your domestic dogs and wolves, Canis lupus, go back to a common ancestor, because from heterozygous wolf archetypes off of the ark, you can get your wolves, your coyotes, your dingoes, and your domestic dogs. But going from a wolf to a chihuahua is ultimately a reduction in allelic variability. Okay, variations hit walls, and a chihuahua is a wall. There's not much you can now do in terms of variation, available variation with a chihuahua.
But we can still create new breeds of dogs. We're doing it all the time. So these walls don't exist. You're dead end with the Chihuahua, but within the same species, you can breed just hypothetically a Chihuahua with a Corgi, and create a new breed, and then you can breed that with a Saint Bernard or something like that. So these walls that you're talking about, I don't see them existing. Let's not with dogs, which you're using as an example, which is a really bad idea considering that they don't exemplify what you're trying to explain.
Never going to be able to take two Chihuahuas and artificially select for a wolf over time. So
you don't have to take two Chihuahuas. You don't have to take two Chihuahuas because they're still the same species as the wolf. You can take anything that's in that. Well, technically anything that's in the Canis genus and get new variety within the Chihuahua genome, and the offspring of that hybrid breed or whatever, of that cross breed, would be healthier than a purebred Chihuahua because of the genetic bottlenecking caused by the domestication process.
In the biblical creation model, speciation is expected to slow down over time since the available heterozygosity decreases over time. We as biblical creationists, we look back to the creation event.
But somehow with dogs, it didn't, because we still create new breeds. I don't remember seeing any Labradoodles when I was a child, but there's Labradoodles on every corner now. We are still mixing and matching alleles of dogs to create new and distinct breeds. It hasn't slowed down. It's just in the domestic aspect of things. It's all these walls don't exist. We are still able to create new varieties of organisms in the wild. Obviously, in our model, it makes sense because we're not artificially picking and choosing the features. That it's just whatever makes it through the filter. So that's sensible. That's what our model shows. Whereas your model shows that they climbed up the ark, rapid speciation, and then you would say it was due to genetic degradation that they stopped speciating so much. But why are we still able to pull it off in an artificial environment? If that would indicate to me that the genetic diversity is still there within the genomes of these organisms that aren't changing, that have stopped changing, yet they still have the genetic diversity built into their genomes. It's just not taking hold in the wild because the static condition of our environment allows them to be stable and not need to speciate.
And we see an expansion of allelic variability. Notice here, scenario 1, DNA copies are different, which can lead to variation. That is a heterozygous state. Versus scenario 2, DNA copies are the same, a homozygous state, where you're going to get no variation, a state of no DNA diversity, basically. Okay? So, right here, be fruitful and multiply, makes sense of this command here. Nuclear DNA, your autosomal DNA, where we have recombination, as you can see.
Nuclear DNA is inherited from the ancestor. Mitochondrial DNA is inherited from a single lineage. Yeah, that's fine. He's probably not going to talk about horizontal gene transfer, but that's another factor that we're missing from this.
Be inherited from all ancestors. It's biparentally inherited DNA. Your uniparentally inherited DNA, we're going to touch on later. Your mitochondrial DNA and your Y chromosome. So right here, genetic limits. Furthermore, this front loading of genetic information at the creation event also naturally sets limits on the speciation process. Since most of the genetic variety we see today goes back to the creation week, formation of new kinds, right, higher categorization, such as at the family level, right, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. We're going to get into classification soon. Would require a massive, miraculous input of new genetic information. Because again, you can only have so many shifts in heterozygosity to homozygosity before you hit a wall.
This is legit Pokemon nonsense here that we're dealing with Donnie laying out. So he's like this idea of this rapid evolution. They come off the ark, and you can basically train your kind, your Pokemon, to adapt to any environment. You're like, oh, I'm gonna throw my Bulbasaur into this environment, so it evolves to be throw it into the water, so it evolves to be a water Bulbasaur, and throw it into the jungle, so it's a jungle one. And that's how this happened with these organisms, and they were front loaded with, okay, if we live in the water, we turn this way. If we live in the jungle, we turn that way. And making this claim that and then once you evolve your Pokemon towards that environment, you can't go back, is essentially the claim. But you could take the jungle Pokemon and the water Pokemon and breed them together and make, like, I don't know, a swamp Pokemon or something, swamp Bulbasaur. Just using that as an example, that they don't lose that ability to still interbreed with the other populations immediately. That's only after speciation happens, which you don't believe happens. So they should always be able to breed together. So these dead-end walls that you're talking about don't seem to exist, because a tiger and a cat should be genetically viable based on your model, that they were front-loaded with this information, but they're still the same kind, so there should still be interfertile.
Under the parameters we just laid out, evolution, as Darwin described, is not possible. Again, it's the evolutionists that explain the vast majority of genetic variation as being the result of what? Mutations over time.
Right.
While the creationist explains the vast majority of DNA diversity as being the result of created nuclear heterozygosity. That means the beneficial diversity, for the most part, is due.
Yeah, but the problem with nuclear heterozygosity is that it's still retained in the population, even if it isn't expressed. So you could have a heterozygous feature that isn't expressed in you specifically, but may be expressed in your offspring or the future generations of your offspring. So they don't just disappear because they're not expressed.
Due to initial design. But the negative diversity that we see over time that accumulates, that is due to mutations, because mutations degrade, mutations lead to disease, mutations are functionally compromising to organisms. Notice this, it represents a scientifically superior explanation to any that Darwin or his scientific descendants have proposed to date. Exactly, this model, and this is where I want to move on to testable predictions. This model leads to testable and falsifiable predictions, which again is the gold
we need testable and falsifiable predictions. Hit me with them.
standard of science. Okay, and it's creations based on this starting point of design diversity that are making testable predictions on DNA function and the trajectory of discovery when it comes to.
I don't know. So the term junk DNA, I don't know that it's been my experience that wasn't that is more of a derivative from the young Earth creationist community. I mean, I guess I've heard the term junk DNA to describe the genetic information or genetic frequencies that we don't know exactly what their functions were. But I don't know that just based on this meme, not anything he's saying. I just don't like the term junk DNA, because just because we don't understand what something's doing or how it's working doesn't mean it's junk. And like I was just saying before, with your heterozygous model, there should be retaining these other allelic characteristics that aren't being expressed within the gene. So that information would be in junk DNA as well.
DNA function actually favors genome-wide functionality. Right? We understand that most of our genome has tremendous evidence for biochemical activity and biochemical function. I've touched quite a bit on this in my books, previous lectures, and debates. This is important because if design diversity is true, then an obvious prediction would be that the vast majority of DNA elements, DNA sequences, is functional and beneficial. And that's exactly what we see with the best so-called lines of evidence for evolution. Endogenous retroviruses represent highly functional DNA units. Allu sequences represent highly functional DNA units. Functional, okay, when it comes to ERVs, functional in embryological development, functional in determining cell type.
Right.
Functional in gene expression. They act as antiviral protectors. They act in tumor suppression. That's just to name a few.
Okay.
And the evolutionists are incapable of showing any non-functional endogenous retroviruses going from non-functional or even altering their pre-existing function.
That's because if
something that is literally,
because if they're non-functional and deleterious, they're going to be removed from the genome. And viruses aren't just in certain things willy-nilly.
needed in the organism to survive. Because I have papers demonstrating that even the secular scientists admit without endogenous retrovirus elements, we couldn't exist. I like to exist. The evolutionist likes to exist. Everybody in the chat hopefully likes to exist. Without ERVs, we literally wouldn't exist.
Right, because they're part of our genetic structure now.
And this is all part of the design diversity prediction. Pseudogenes, same thing. They represent functional units of DNA. So again, it was in 2012, as a matter of fact, that the ENCODE project came out with remarkable findings indicating that upwards of 80% of the human genome was active to some extent. Okay, this is biochemical function. And it was surprising to discover that the genome consists of only about 20,000 genes. This was not an expected or anticipated number. We now know that the vast portion of the human genome are non-coding DNA sequences that don't directly code for protein products. This is a major reason why so many of the evolutionary community assume that most of the human genome constituted what? Useless evolutionary baggage. Remember, if what we see is the result of...
That's not even... no, that's not even a position that's ever been the mainstream, that the majority of our DNA doesn't. It's been that we don't know what these genes are doing. Sure. There's been, hey, we don't know what this function is, or hey, we thought this functioned in this way and it doesn't. And maybe maybe we don't know all of the functions of all the genes, but I don't know that anybody ever claimed that they must be junk at that point. Now, that's not to say that there can't be non-functional genetics in there, or genetics that aren't functional within or expressed within you, but could take a hold in a future generation.
Millions of years of descent with modification, then the genomes of living organisms should reflect that. And so a direct expectation from the evolutionary model, this model right here, Fisherman evolution, would be lots of evolutionary leftovers, genomic fossils, viral fossils. Yet that's not what we find. We find the opposite. We find genomes of treasure rather than genomes of junk. And this is why your militant evolutionists fight the evidence so strongly in favor of genome-wide functionality. Because again, even when it comes to mutation accumulation, guys, they've done numerical simulations where even if the genome was only 10% functional.
If you haven't noticed yet, that most of Donnie's presentation is just buzzwords about young Earth creationist concepts that have been long since debunked or just don't work in any model of reality, but they sound good. If you pay attention, that's mostly what Donnie's arguments are here.
Degeneration would be inevitable. Organisms would descend into genetic sickness.
Degeneration is inevitable. We do have genetic degradation in populations that are weeded out. It's weeded out, Donnie. That's where we're losing you. Those deleterious genetic structures are weeded out of the population in order to have viable ones thrive. They cannot compete with the viable ones, so they are removed from the population. That's how evolution works.
I understand that the genome is somewhere between 60 and 80% functional. That means evolution's falsified. It can't happen. That's roughly 60 to 80 deleterious mutations accumulating from generation to generation. So again, you can have trillions of years. Time is not the hero of...
Thanks for stopping by, PZ. I'm glad you were able to hang out and suffer through this with me. Happy birthday to Mrs. Myers. It's much better use of your time than listening to this guy's nonsense. Well, I hope that hanging out with me was a good use of your time, because I love hanging out with you, PZ. I love seeing you drop by the side chat. You have a good one. We're about done here too. It's 10 minutes till noon. That's when my time slot ends.
But the story for the evolution, the more years you have, the more extinction and degeneration you get. These mutations that accumulate in humans, roughly 100 new mutations per person per generation, with most of those being deleterious, since most of the genome is functional as predicted by the...
It does not mean that those mutations necessarily get passed on to the next generation of offspring, though. It's because you have novel mutations within your genome as an individual does not mean that those will be moved forward into the population. Those could live and die with you, and you could produce offspring that doesn't have those mutations.
Design diversity or created heterozygosity.
Obviously, you can produce offspring that does have those mutations too. I don't want to say that, but that's not guaranteed. That's not the way that genetics work.
Hypothesis. So again, the evolutionists require genomes of junk in order that the genomes of living organisms can reflect descent with modification. I hope that makes sense to the audience. All right. And what they've actually advanced in the form of an argument or rebuttal to this amazing evidence for genome-wide activity is that this activity is not actually useless. The transcription is simply spurious, or it's just noise. Okay, it's not important. But the question is, if this is not real beneficial activity, then why is the cell bothering with it? Why is the cell bothering transcribing it?
The cell doesn't think; it just does its thing. It builds what it's supposed to build. Good grief, Donnie. Yeah, it's not thinking about what it needs to do. It's just, hey, this is the genetic information that we have. We're going to build the DNA on this, sperm and egg, all that good stuff. Okay, so it's not thinking, oh, how should I build this? It's just building it. It's building it. That's what it does. That's its function. No thought process. It's not bothering with it. It's just doing it.
This would be incredibly wasteful of resources and energy for the cell.
Seriously, the level of personification put into natural processes from the young Earth creationist corner of things is ridiculous.
Okay, this activity is strong indication that it is useful and beneficial. So this whole argument that suggests most of the transcription taking place in the genome is nearly spurious and just genetic noise, it doesn't make very much sense. Since we recognize that transcribing a portion of the genome is a what? It's a very energy-intensive process. Guys, every time a nucleotide is being added to a growing RNA chain, you are consuming a great deal of energy. These transcripts would clutter up the interior of the cell if they weren't playing any real operational role. So right off the bat, intuitively, this evolutionary rescue device does not make a lot of sense.
I don't even know what you just said about clogging up the genome. That's not how this works. I don't. Maybe me and you need to talk sometime. You can explain what you mean by clogging up. What'd you say? What was the term you used? I'm going to finish up here. This is probably enough, Donnie, for me. Let me hear what he said.
Recognize that transcribing a portion of the genome is a what? It's a very energy-intensive process. Guys, every time a nucleotide is being added to a growing RNA chain, you are consuming a great deal of energy. These transcripts would clutter up the interior of the cell if they weren't playing any real operational role. Transcripts would
clutter. Okay, we'll have to talk about that. Me and you, Donnie. All right.